Hello, folks. Thanks for joining us here at Behind the Headlines. We have another excellent interview for you. Earlier in this month, we've spoken to Julian Assange's wife, Stella Assange, Medea Benjamin, the co-founder of Code Pink, and today another great guest facing some ridiculous persecution by our government. But to give you a little background, in 1972. When the Black Liberation Movement was destroyed and as a movement and in a climate of political terror and brutal repression, Chairman Omali Yeshitela founded the African People's Socialist Party here inside the United States. And this past July, the movement was raided by the FBI. To quote from one of the articles about it, FBI agents took aim at a Black liberation organization that has been a sharp critic of the U.S. NATO-backed war in Ukraine and a defender of poor nations threatened with U.S. sanctions, coups, embargoes, and blockades. These include Cuba, Syria, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Iran. They used flashbang grenades at 5 a.m. on a Friday and in order to startle everyone inside the house, and then proceeded to handcuff and arrest people. So we're going to get into all the details of that and much, much more. But without going further into it, I'd like to introduce Chairman Omali Yeshitela.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here. It's great to speak with you. I wish it were under better circumstances. I'm wondering, before we get into the raid and everything, I know you do a better job than I would. So I'm wondering if you can explain your organization and its mission and what you've been working for since 1972.
Well, I want to express my appreciation to you. And I think this is exactly the right time for us to come together, precisely because there is ongoing intent by the United States government to isolate us and prevent us from having a discussion with the people. That's why they come at 5 o'clock in the morning when people are not awake, and they awaken people with flashbang grenades that terrorizes an entire community, more than just me. And that they would silo any discussion about the conditions of African people in this country. So that what has happened with us won't get out. Generally speaking, Zuckerberg is not going to put it out, and who shadow ban and will do all these other things. So this is really important that you have opened this door to us to have this discussion with your audience and your base. In terms of history, I was an organizer with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee called SNCC. It was an incredibly significant organization that came into existence as a kind of bridge between the civil rights movement as we had known it and what would be characterized later on as the Black Power movement. In fact, it was SNCC that advanced the whole slogan of Black Power, and that resonated with African people, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. This is where my seriously organized political activity began. And SNCC itself came under assault by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It was harassed, and many of its leaders were arrested and some chased out of the country. And in 1969, December 29th, rather, of 1966, I was involved in a demonstration at the City Hall in St. Petersburg, Florida. We were protesting the fact that a lot of money was coming from the federal government to that city. And all of it was going downtown to beautify downtown St. Petersburg, while African people lived under horrible conditions, no economics there except for what we had provided for ourselves, but it was our tax monies that was going to this. And so we were protesting that, and on the wall of the City Hall, the seat of government there in St. Petersburg, Florida, was this 8 by 10 foot mural. It was a degrading mural. It was a caricature of African people as monkey-like creatures who were playing banjos and things like that for white people, with extended limbs, huge pink lips over most of our faces and playing banjos for white people on the beach. We had complained about this before, and the liberal mayor there told us that we had to just, our minorities, as he put it, just had to learn to be less sensitive to this kind of stuff, and that he wasn't a racist, and everybody knew he wasn't a racist. So they refused to take it down. I marched into the city hall during one of the protest marches there, and with one other person, I snatched a mural from the wall, and I was arrested, charged with 11 offenses. Tried, had ridiculous hours of the night and things like that, and actually was convicted of grand larceny for taking the mural down, sentenced to 5 years in prison, and was in and out of prison around that, and got prison time, jail time for other things of protests. All of this associated with the struggle for liberation of our people. And you got to remember, this is 1966 that I'm talking about, not 2006, but 1966. And the founding, this is the year that SNCC put forth the Black Power slogan. And this was something that startled and shook the entire establishment, that African people were talking about power, as opposed to the simplistic notion, fighting against racism, make white people like us kind of things, and that we have power. And when we said Black power, what it did was make the struggle of African people in this country something that was consistent with the struggle of colonized peoples around the world. You got to remember, we're talking about a period where in 1966, something like the CIA would contribute to the mass murder of 1 million people, communists, in Indonesia. And I'm saying Indonesia because this was an anti-colonial movement that people were involved in. Indonesia was really critical to the anti-colonial movement. In 1954-55, the Bandung Conference, African agents came together to talk about, fighting against colonialism. So anyway, 1966, that was the same year that people came together in Havana, Cuba, and with the Tricontinental Conference, people from all around the world who were colonized. So the colonial struggle was something that was shaking up the world. The Vietnamese were still fighting. Algeria struggle still going on against colonialism. Yeah. And African people now are saying power. We want power, which is an anti-colonial demand. And so anyway, we took that mural down, and I was in prison. I got 5 years sentence, and we were still involved in struggles subsequent to that. And I built an organization called JOMO, which was very much like the Black Panther Party. I built the African People's Socialist Party because it became clear that we had to move beyond simply protesting a problem, and that we had to concentrate on trying to capture political power in our own lives and exercising power. And that we saw a political party as being the best instrument for doing that. And so in 1972, with many of the forces who I had worked with in the past during SNCC and what have you, and with many of the lessons learned from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which was about really organizing as opposed to simply doing stuff on social media, becoming social media militants. And the party was born then in 1972. And so, that's a little bit about the history. And since that time, we have organized not only throughout the United States, but we're in the Caribbean. We have a party presence and sometimes actual organizations throughout South Africa. You will go to several of the provinces, perhaps the majority of provinces in South Africa. We're located there. We're located in Sierra Leone. We're located in Ghana. We're located in Uganda, Tanzania, just various places on the continent of Africa, because we concluded that the struggle of Black people had run into its limitations when fought just within the borders that had been created for us by our colonizers. I mean, you look at Africa, these borders were created in 1884 and 85. Not a single African was in the room in Berlin.
That's one of the most, I'm sad to say, I only learned that history maybe 2 years ago, and it blew my mind. I mean, I knew Africa was colonized, but the idea that they put a map on a wall in an all-white male room and said, here's the new nations of Africa, and just split families apart and put enemies together, and
Yeah. So and so we've been building and working with that forever. And right now in St. Louis, it's one of our most important projects. We started organizing in St. Louis with the 2014 murder of Mike Brown. We saw this courageous uprising of Black people on Canfield Drive in Ferguson, which is nothing but a suburb of St. Louis. And we came into Ferguson. We've been building in St. Louis since 2014. We have transformed a large section of North St. Louis, which is a very oppressed, economically depressed sector of the city. It has suffered from what the officials in 1972 developed, what they call it a Team 4 plan, which was supposed to result in what they call benign neglect, where it was a purposeful, conscious effort, and not just effort, but act by the city government to starve out the North St. Louis where African people live and to transfer resources every place. And anybody can Google that, by the way, Team 4 from 1972 in St. Louis. And so if you come to St. Louis, people have been shown photos of Ukraine and things like that. You come to North St. Louis, it's like a war zone, just in terms of how communities have been destroyed, buildings and things like that deteriorating, allowed to deteriorate. St. Louis had the first so-called land bank in this country. And the so-called land bank is called, it's some kind of land, I forgot the LRA, I've forgotten exactly what the LRA stands, but what they do is they capture all this land that people lose through taxes and sometimes through liens and things like that. And they create conditions where it's very difficult in many instances for Africans to hold on to the property. So St. Louis, right. The city of St. Louis is the largest property owner in St. Louis. And so they take these properties from African people and they leave them abandoned, et cetera. And they function as a bank so that big investors and things like that, they get hundreds of these properties, which were once owned by African people. They get them for themselves and to do anything they want to in terms of so-called economic development. So, and it's very difficult, generally speaking, for African people to get that land. We've succeeded in getting some of that because we have certain expertise in terms of economic development work that we've been doing for a long, long time. We have a couple of furniture stores, one in St. Louis, one in Oakland, California, one in Philadelphia. So we have some expertise there, and we were able to acquire some of these properties. And then there was pushback from some black older persons because every success that we had was experienced as a criticism of the fact they hadn't done anything. So in a very short period of time, we succeeded in literally transforming some of the most significant stretches in North St. Louis that have been left to rot and abandoned. African people have begun to move back into the area. People have been willing to invest in their own businesses in the area. This used to be a flourishing sector of the city. Africans had businesses and things like that that are no longer there. Whole cities, I mean, one sector, a whole community is now, used to be a Black community, is now the runway for the airport here in St. Louis. Another African community, used to be an African community, is now where the Galleria Mall is in St. Louis. The people lost all their properties and things like that and been pushed into states of destitution. Right. And we've been challenging that. We've created a farmer's market. They talk about a food desert. We say, no, there's a power desert here. So we work to create farmers markets, and we created an opportunity for African people to come and actually sell and vend for ourselves, so money can circulate inside the community instead of coming in one door and going out the other door like that. That's the kind of thing that we've done, and it's in the wake of this kind of work that the FBI attacked us here in St. Louis at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, let's thank you for that history. It's so much to learn, and you've been doing so much work for so many years. Let's get to that FBI raid, and we'll try we'll try and also discuss the so-called reasons for it. But yeah, they showed up at, I guess, just run people through it real quick if you're not too tired of talking about it. But they showed up at 5 a.m. and with flashbang grenades.
Yeah, my wife and I were sitting at the dining room table. We live right now, truly, is one of the most economically depressed sectors of St. Louis. That's where we live, my wife and I right now. And some others of people of our movement live in this area. And so we sitting there, and actually I'm preparing to go to the gym, and we're initiating a program to train doulas, African women who can
midwives.
Make healthy environments for birthing babies for the mothers and the children. Because in St. Louis there are enough Black babies that die in the first year of life to fill 15 kindergarten classrooms every year. So
the U.S. is one of the only wealthy countries with infant mortality actually increasing.
Exactly. So this is one of the programs that we brought to the community. And so we're sitting there talking about this, and all of a sudden, out of the night, this racket. I mean, it startled us because at first you couldn't make sense of it. It just was so you couldn't make sense of it. It's hard to actually believe this is happening. You hear this racket comes over the loudspeaker saying that people who are in this residence come out with your hands up and your hands empty. This is the FBI. And then as this is being said, flashbang grenades, these explosions begin to go off throughout, all around the house and throughout the neighborhood. And then in the back stairwell, they penetrate the back stairwell of the house, and they're exploding these grenades in the stairwell. And so this is what's going on. And so I asked my wife to let me go down first and to call people and let them know that we were being attacked. And she tried to do that, but they had jammed our phones. The phone company worked hand in glove with them, and she couldn't call anybody. Wow. So I go downstairs, and when I get downstairs, I'm greeted by these military forces in camouflage outfits, carrying assault weapons, and with mounted laser targeting devices, and they are all hitting me in the chest. These laser targeting devices, clearly, saying that they want me to know they can kill me if they want to. In front of my house, right in front of my house, there's this armored vehicle, and all of these people are out there. My wife, she comes downstairs behind me, and as she comes downstairs, she's almost hit in the face by a drone that they're sending up the stairs into the house. So we get downstairs. The flashbang grenades are still going off in the neighborhood. They utilized in the St. Louis Police Department. They blocked off the neighborhood, and then they telling me, I'm asking them, what is going on? Why are you doing this? And they're saying that that there's an indictment that's coming down later this morning of a Russian national who's in Russia, and should he ever come to this country, we're going to put him on trial or something to that effect. And your name was mentioned in the indictment. Well, let me see. And we have a search warrant for your house. So let me see the search warrant. They said, well, this is here somewhere. We just don't have it, right now. And well, let me see the indictment. Well, we can't show the indictment because it's only going to be dropped later on this morning in Tampa, Florida. So here we are. They zip tie me behind my back. They take my cell phone from me. My wife, when she comes down, they handcuff her behind her back. And then they say that we could sit on the curb while they do this. Their objective in part is to terrorize us, terrorize the community, and then to humiliate us, in front of the people sitting on the curb, et cetera. And so we didn't do that. And so, we finally, just through protesting, what is going on? Why are you doing this? We say, well, if you want to, you can go upstairs and you can sit in this little place and not move. And while we go through the house, I don't want to go up there with you. So I finally persisted and said, well, are we under arrest? No. Well, can we leave? Yes, they said you can leave. So cut these zip ties off my back, get these guns out of my face. So they had a problem cutting the zip ties off me. They were able to take the handcuffs off my wife rather easily. So we lead, but at the same time, we didn't know it. Across town in a majority white section of St. Louis, which is on the south side, they've raided one of our centers there. They raided them. This is a Solidarity Center that's run by the Hutu Solidarity Movement, the mostly white organization that works under our leadership. They use battering rams, sophisticated, high-powered battering rams, knock down steel doors, put tape over the security video, so nobody to try and keep people from seeing what it is that they're doing, what they've done. And then in addition to that, they go to an apartment that's upstairs, and they handcuffed the two young people, white people who live there, hold them at gunpoint. They loot cell phones. They loot all kinds of electronic devices, laptops, etc. And then they go to the home of two of the leaders of the Solidarity Movement. They knock in the doors there. They do a similar thing, and they've already looted my house. They stay there for hours. They don't just stay there they stay there for hours. So, I mean, which is extraordinary for a number of reasons, because if in fact they had a search warrant, they could have rung the doorbell and say, hey, we have a search warrant, knocked on the door. They didn't do that. The objective was not to serve a search warrant, but to terrorize me, terrorize the community, terrorize other folk, and then said, and then this FBI agent, this guy, he says that this is going to be in the news. You're going to make the news. It's going to be big news. And so, to let me know that this is a political thing more than anything else. This was a political attack on us using a law as the basis of doing that. And so this whole notion about political violence in America is a country where you don't see political violence like you do in other places. But if that were the case, Martin Luther King would be alive, Malcolm X would be alive, Fred Hampton would be alive, and they wouldn't be coming with flashbang grenades at 5 o'clock in the morning. That's political violence. And so, so that's more or less what happened. And the charges are that we violated, they said, the Foreign Agent Registration Act. That what we've done is I went to Moscow. I went to Moscow at the invitation of a non-governmental organization, an NGO, that was having an international conference around self-determination. There were people there from all around the world, huge, open kind of process. I went there.
And just to be clear, going to Moscow is not illegal.
Well, that's the issue. That's the issue. And then that we did an election in 2017 and 2019. This is a number of elections we've done over a period of time. We've built an entire movement where we teach Black people how to participate in the electoral process. So they said that the elections that we participated in 2017 and 2019, where for the first time in history, we placed reparations on the electoral ballot in this country. We promoted things like Black community control of the police, and we also made an assault on gentrification that's destroying African communities throughout this country. And so they said that the Russians paid for it. That's what the Russians told us to do it. The Russians paid for it. And then they said that because we did a tour, a four-state tour, a four-state tour, where the United Nations was doing a tour inside the United States, having hearings about the conditions of Black people. We were there, every place they were, and we had initiated a campaign to get people to sign petitions charging the United States with violation of the United Nations Convention on prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide. They said the Russians told us to do that. The Russians paid for that. And then what else did we do? I mean, those are a couple of the claims that they made. And so somehow we don't know we're oppressed. It's the thing is that this is
the Russians had to tell you were oppressed.
This is insidious, because this whole racist trope, this racist trope that somehow Black people are too stupid to know what our interests are, and that somebody who they consider white would have to tell us what to do. And this is from the liberal Biden administration, from the liberal Democratic Party, who's supposed to be like the friends of black people, and they would raise this kind of nonsense. And if nothing else, people don't even have to agree with anything that we say, what we believe in, or anything like that. But if you believe in what America says it's about, what Biden says he's about, what the Democratic Party says it's about, in terms of people having right to free speech, people have the right, freedom of travel, freedom of assembly, and things like this. This is supposed to be constitutionally guaranteed. And if you know that I have the right to believe what I want to believe, then you have to be opposed to what this government is doing to us. And also, you need to know that we're not the only person. W.E. Du Bois was charged with the very same offense in 1951 and put on trial. The FBI cut his teeth with the attack on Marcus Garvey 100 years ago. You had Paul Robeson, who was brought before the House Un-American Activities Committee. You had various black leaders. I mean, Martin Luther King. This is King. The U.S. government gives you a day off to celebrate their murder of Martin Luther King, or they call it the birth of Martin Luther King, right? And so everybody's heard what the FBI did with King. In terms of, trying to make him commit suicide, spying on him, sending him all kind of garbage, his wife, harassment, and also Malcolm X. And so this is how they've treated. And so the real thing is that black freedom is illegal and has been. And people need to remember that we are not among that group of people who came to this land looking for a better way of life. We lost a better way of life as a consequence of having been snatched up at gunpoint. We came here at gunpoint. And since our arrival here, we've been fighting to be free and fighting however you want to characterize it. Even if you want to say it's against racism or to get justice or something to that effect, that's been the history. And I can't see from any investigation I've done a single day, not one day, since black people have been in this country where we have not had the worst kinds of treatment, atrocities by government, by white nationalists who will come into churches and kill us, blow us up, bomb us, and things like that. That's our struggle. And so the Russians had to tell us that we are oppressed.
And it seems somewhat appropriate that this is being done, ironically appropriate that this is being done under Joe Biden, who, like you said, the liberals have this claim of caring about black people, but Joe Biden, authored the law that has doubled our prison state, putting so many black men and women in prison. But then on top of that, he when he was a young politician, he was against desegregation. He was good friends with Strom Thurmond and gave the eulogy at his funeral. This is not a man who is anti-racist by any means.
One might ask the question of whether
FBI or any government agency given any evidence to these claims that the Russians are puppeteering your actions?
No, but they stole all of our devices. I mean, they will contrive something. I mean, they've got every text, every email that's come from me. They did the same thing to members of the Solidarity Movement. So let me just say this for the benefit of everything that's being said here. People can probably tell I'm disgusted with this and that I am not a friend of the treatment that black people have experienced in this country historically. Say that right up front. But I would say this, that we did not break the law. And that's the thing that I want to make point. What they have manufactured this story. They have manufactured, and we don't have to, because what is clear is that America cannot tolerate the struggle for democracy by black people. All I want is democracy. And people have just discovered what they're characterizing as the weaponization of the FBI, and this has been going on forever. And people who've noticed the struggle of black people, if they could see, then they would see that we talk about King now. It's wide open. Everybody knows what happened there. And what they've done, however, is that they've manufactured and worked on this whole racist notion that black people are inhuman or unhuman or bestial and can't understand anything on our own. So that the Russians told us to do it, and they are depending on a number of white people to believe that trope, and they are depending on some Negro politicians to be so afraid of something like this happening to them that they won't speak out. I'm talking about me. There's Leonard Peltier. I mean, the fact is that there are concentration camps in this country today that are euphemistically referred to as Indian reservation. How the hell do the indigenous people on whose land all of this democracy that's been spoken of has been, who's living on this land? And how can they talk about, the indigenous people? Here's Leonard Peltier. I don't know how long he's been locked up. You've got all of these political prisoners in this country. Mumia Abu-Jamal, people is one of the most recognized. Sundiata Acoli, just a whole bunch of folk, and Asada Shakur running for her life in Cuba. But this is a narrative they don't want to happen. So if we complain, if we say about something about it, they said, no, you have the right to run for elections. You have the right of free speech. But the problem is that I'm not attacking you for running for election and free speech. I'm attacking you because the Russians told you to do it. So when you say something about genocide, we don't have to address the question of genocide because the Russians told you to do it. So we're going to put your ass in jail. This is the kind of thing that they're doing. They liquidate the question, the real questions involved, and they hide behind this notion, this bogus characterization of the Foreign Agent Registration Act. They hide behind that in order to lock people up at a time where the Biden administration has characterized the world as being split between these contending forces of democracies represented by the United States, especially with Joe Biden at the helm, and autocracies where you got Russia, Iran, and anybody that the United States doesn't get along with at this moment is an autocrat. And so the obligation is to take this on. And how are you going to be the great democracy with George Floyd and Mike Brown and all these other people who are being killed, black people who are being killed? And so they can do that if black people don't complain. And if black people do complain, it's because the Russians, the autocrats, are the ones who told us to do this. And it's got nothing to do. They don't say it's unreal. They don't say that genocide is not being committed. It took 40 years after passage of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide before it was even ratified by the United States, and then with conditions that the United States could not be held accountable to it.
Yeah, all important points. You mentioned the killings of so many Black men and women in America by police, and this year we've just capped off one of the highest ever years of killings by police. Black people are killed at a much higher percentage than the percentage of the population they are. And the thing people really don't talk about enough, although there was an article in the New York Times, but they don't mention it ever again, is that the Lancet Medical Journal just this past year showed that the number of killings by police in America is actually over double what we're told, because most of them, the majority, are not listed as killing by police. So when we hear we've got the highest number ever, it's actually double that.
Yes. And the highest per population number of people in prison in this country. This is just an objective reality, but you can't talk about it. If you talk about it, then you're working for the Russians or some other force, and they assume that through the utilization of platforms controlled by people like Zuckerberg and what have you, then you can't break out of this information quarantine that's been imposed, these silos that's been imposed on us. And the fact is that people in the United States and a few people in Europe are the only ones who believe this trope. That's everybody else is, that's why they couldn't even get anybody to unite with this thing about this war that they've initiated against Russia, using Ukraine as the means to do that. Nobody agrees to that. I mean, that's why, just December 15th, I think it was, Biden, because now for the first time since the 1960s, Biden and the US government is in contention with other powers like China and Russia for the fidelity of peoples around the world in terms of which system is best and this kind of thing, once again. And so now Biden summons 49 heads of state from Africa to this meeting, so-called summit, which is a farce. And then he says to them that, that America has created this horrible offense. He says that he has to apologize for it. Because it's the original sin of America is what they've done and how they've treated African people, which, by the way, is almost an exact quote from Karl Marx, who talked about the capitalist system how the what he called primitive accumulation of capital, turning Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins, et cetera, ad infinitum, that this has the same significance in political economy as original sin in theology. So Biden now talks about this original sin. But I can't work to deal against that original sin because if I'm doing it, it's because the Russians are the ones who told us to do it. This is just nonsensical. And they rely on people like you who are participating in this meeting, who are watching this discussion that we're having now. They really have to depend on people to go along with this garbage, this blind trope, and to sacrifice your democratic rights, because people have to understand that you cannot attack the rights of black people for free speech, freedom of assembly, and what have you, not without becoming victimized to a greater degree yourself. Because once you open the door to this kind of treatment, once you allow that to happen, then everybody is subject to the same kind of treatment or worse. And that's, I think, is really important to say.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You mentioned that people are not going along with this U.S. proxy war in Ukraine, which, by the way, former CIA Director Leon Panetta and others have also called it publicly a proxy war. So they're not even keeping it a secret anymore that this is a proxy war. And yet a lot of Americans don't know. We are fed so much propaganda. A lot of Americans don't know that 80% of the world's population are in countries that are not supporting the U.S. sanctions. They may not all be picking a side, but they're not supporting the U.S. sanctions, meaning they're not going to be part of this proxy war. And you also bring up the media, and yeah, it's very carefully created and crafted to be inside a very tiny Overton window of acceptable thought, that obviously discussing the FBI raid on you and the attacks on you is outside of that. And, you know, I myself have had my Facebook shadow banned since 2016 and my YouTube channel deleted just for being anti-war and anti-capitalist. And that's too much.
Yeah, that's too much. That's too much.
As a young person, I wanted to ask you whether, though, even though those things I just mentioned about our media and getting information out, do you feel you're seeing a shift in still people are getting the message, are waking up there? I feel like you mentioned MLK and the way people view him. I feel like more of America, and maybe I'm in my own bubble and I am wrong, but I feel like more of America understands that he was killed by our own government. They also, many of them understand that he said things that were anti-capitalist, that were anti-Vietnam War, and that he was persecuted by our FBI. It seems like that understanding is far more common now than it was 20 years ago.
That's true. I mean, in fact, it was King who said that America is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. America. Yeah, he didn't say Russia. He didn't say Saddam Hussein. He didn't say the Iranians or the Cuba. He said America is the greatest purveyor of violence in this country. And yes, it is shifting. And I think that's a problem. I mean, like I mentioned, the African People's Solidarity Committee, or I inferred it, and the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. These are organizations of white people that work in solidarity with our struggle. And they do reparation work all over this country. And we, through this organization alone, this is an organization of white people. We exist in something like 141 cities in this country, and something like 40 states in this country. These are white people who they used to be able to rely on what appeared to be this absolute solidarity. And I'm not sure it was ever absolute solidarity with what the government was doing to black people and things like that. But the most of the white people and most of the Africans didn't have like an instrument through which to voice their protests. And when those instruments did come, they were jailed, et cetera, et cetera. They killed a whole bunch of people. They killed Malcolm. They killed King. They killed Fred Hampton. There's no doubt about that. This is stuff that's recorded, et cetera. And they were able to do it without meaningful protests from the white community. But when they attacked us this time, on July 29th, because of the work that has been done, we provide a vehicle through which people who want to unite with this struggle and be opposed to what the government is doing to us, and seeing in what they do to us as symbolic of what they're doing all around the world, they had to attack white people. They went to the white community. They knocked down doors in the white community. And this is a big, drastic kind of shift in what they've had to do. And they had to do this because I think there are growing numbers of white. They get serious problems. The problems are not just with Russia and just with China. The problem is that, you had thousands of people scaling the wall of the Capitol, just the other month, and that there's huge movements of people. The stuff is unraveling, and given an opportunity, what the government would do is play off different forces against each other, because you see that this person is politically unattractive to you. You would sit by and watch the government make this kind of attack and not say anything and not do anything because this is a politically unpopular. And yes, that some of this stuff I think is truly garbage that I see forces, out there in the world doing. But I'm not going to justify what the FBI is doing. I'm not going to justify like the kinds of raids and what people have characterized as the weaponization of the FBI. I was opposed to that before people who are talking about weaponization.
It's not, that didn't start yesterday.
No, it did not start yesterday. And
I actually wanted to ask you, speaking of the FBI as a weapon, the raid on your home and headquarters happened within 8 or 9 days or something of the raid on Mar-a-Lago and Trump. And I'm no fan of Trump. I'm no fan of Joe Biden. But I'm wondering if you feel there's any kind of connection that our government felt they needed to show, well, we're going after people other than just Trump.
Yes, I do think there was a connection. And I think that what they would do, given an opportunity, is conflate the attack on us with the attack on Trump and people who are associated with January 6th, et cetera. And a part of the reason they would do that is because they want to obscure this history of oppression and killing Black people that's been done since we got here. It didn't start with Trump or anything like that. It started a long time ago. I'm going on 100. I'm almost 100. I'm approaching 100 years old, and literally. And there's never been a time in my life, in my entire life, that I am aware that Black people were not being persecuted, lynched, either legally or extra legally, and what have you. This is the reality we've been. Yes, so I think they would conflate it all, and in so doing, obscure, liquidate the struggle of Black people to make just to be free. We want to be just like any other dignified people. We want the right to be a self-governing people in charge of our own affairs. That's why we created what we call dual and contending power programs. That's why we would create the ability to feed, clothe, and house ourselves. We don't want to be on our knees begging and relying on any colonial force to feed and clothe and house us. And this is why we are under assault, which is also the reason they attack people in Afghanistan, which is why they will attack people in Cuba. Everybody has to be dependent upon this hegemon for living, etc. Because at the moment you can take care of yourself, then you cut off all kinds of resources that flows into the coffers of the Zuckerbergs and of the ones who own and control much of the resources of the planet Earth. And who was the president who said, I think maybe about Panama, or maybe it was Roosevelt, something like it's ours, we stole it fair and square. So,
I don't know. Wow. Yeah, that sounds like the motto of the US, I feel like. And you talk about they're coming after you because you wanted to not be reliant and feed and clothe yourselves. Many people, I think, rightly believe that was the true threat of the Black Panthers, was the community organizing, the lunch program, the medical care, all of those things the Black Panthers were doing for the community, that they were showing they were not reliant on a racist white system.
And it was basically the working people, as opposed to these handpicked politicians that they put in our communities to say they represent us. Did you know, I mentioned the elections that we participated in 2017, 2019. We were so effective in that election that at one campaign debate, something like they sent 27 carloads of cops. This is debate. There was those chair throwing, no fist fights or anything like that, just serious disagreements in the debate. And the audience was participating in this debate. They sent 27 carloads of cops there. to bust it up. They changed all the rules so that they wouldn't have any more public debates for the mayor. People couldn't come to the debates anymore. They made it, they all had to be done like this discussion we're having now, so that people couldn't participate. And then for the first time in his career, Barack Hussein Obama came to endorse the candidate that was our opponent. The objective is to make sure that even the ability to discuss these issues that are so critical to African people don't happen. So they'll kill a Martin Luther King. And people who claim to be representing the ideas of Martin Luther King, you don't see hear any of them saying or doing the things. They support these wars, etc., that the United States is involved in. What King's talking about, the greatest purveyor of violence being the United States, they are in bed with the United States. They're in bed with these policies that's killing people around the world, strangling people. And listen, they're pushing the world to the brink of nuclear war. How the hell can you bring Ukrainian soldiers and train them in the United States and continue to pretend that this has got nothing to do with you? How can you strong arm Germany and force them to send tanks and what have you to Ukraine to be used against the Russians? And the Russians know what you're doing. And then there's this whole, and what is up to now been relatively successful is to pretend that this is not a contest between the United States and Russia, because that brings the nuclear question into full view of everybody else. So if you can say, this is not us, these are the poor Ukrainians, these are poor Ukrainians fighting against this despotic Russia or this despotic Putin, then you can perhaps get away with doing all kinds of very insidious things. And they've done insidious things. They've assassinated people, in Russia, and they've done all kinds of things like that. But at the moment it becomes full view like this, then you push countries into situations where you narrow their capacity to be pretending that they're not fighting you, and makes it increasingly necessary for them to start doing everything that has to be done to fight a nuclear power. And I think it was somebody in Russia who once said that that this is not Afghanistan. And somebody, said this, we have the ability to turn America into a parking lot. And this is serious. And they're playing with people's lives and like this, and they don't want any protest. Don't say anything about it. Don't bring this stuff up. This is the situation that we are looking at right now and living in, and the world is changing. There's no way in hell that anybody's going to be able to stop this transformation in the world, this so-called unipolar world, this so-called the world that's controlled by the Atlanticists that created NATO for the exact purpose of controlling and containing Russia. That's what it was created for. It's not like they discovered this just now with Ukraine. So there's a lot of the major fundamental, and that, by the way, is one of the things that made Trump a problem too, because he attacked the Atlanticist project. And I'm no friend of Trump either. I'm just objectively speaking, that's what happened for 75 more years or more. The Atlanticist project has determined the political and economic configuration of the world. And now that's been challenged in a very serious way with the emergence of Russia, or re-emergence of Russia, the emergence of China and what have you. It's a different game altogether. And you can't control history like that. It can't be done. And despite Biden's, that's going to be harder to do than it is to contain the information in Hunter Biden's computer. This is going to be difficult to do. You can't delete that.
Well, yeah. Speaking of containing Hunter Biden's computer, the truth is the truth is viral. You can't. They're running around like whack-a-mole trying to make sure nobody speaks the truth. And with the internet, it's incredibly difficult. But they're doing the best they can to try and cover and suppress all of these things.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, we've been talking about all the many problems America is facing right now, an immeasurable list of problems, environmental issues, worker struggles, systemic racism, healthcare, and of course, endless war that we get ourselves into intentionally. Right. How much of this long list would you connect to capitalism?
Let me say this, that I think that it's all associated with capitalism, but capitalism itself has its foundation in a world economy that came into existence through colonialism. And that's one of the reasons you see the center of all of these struggles being in places like Afghanistan and Black communities in Africa. That's why you have, for the first time in history, a four-star general, a Black four-star general who's been put in charge of AFRICOM to control Africa. That's why the first time in history you have a Black so-called Secretary of Defense, former four-star general. I think this colonial question, that's why it was necessary to have a Barack Hussein Obama, because of the colonial question. And yes, the whole capitalist system rests upon that foundation. And that's why you increasingly find
the new leader of the Democrats in the House, Hakeem Jeffries.
Hakeem Jeffries. And then let's look at the guy out of New York who got on the airplane with Pelosi to go into Taiwan to antagonize China with that visit. What's his name? He's the guy who put forth in the U.S. Congress. They passed a law in the U.S. House that characterizes all the African countries. They punish the African countries and Africans and so-called diaspora that won't go along with the U.S. War in Ukraine. You should look that up. I would think of his name probably within the next few seconds. But yeah,
it wasn't Cory Booker, was it?
No. This guy's out of New York. Booker's in New Jersey. This guy's out of New York, and he's plays some role in the.
It could be Hakeem Jeffries.
No, it's not Jeffries. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name.
Okay.
But which is crazy because it's been with me all the time. I've been talking about him quite seriously. But and I'm glad to mention that because somebody otherwise is subject to believe that we are talking on purely what they would characterize racial lines. But Barack Hussein Obama, and a whole bunch of other forces like that. What's the woman who stands behind Biden every time he has a press conference with this rumpled, oversized pantsuit on? Kamala Harris. I know that was not pleasant. These forces, that's called neo-colonialism. That's colonialism, new colonialism. That's white power and blackface is what we are looking at. And so, yeah, this person actually, from the House, the House has passed this law that designed to punish Africans on the continent of Africa and the diaspora that contends with the U.S.
Gregory Meeks.
There you are. Yeah, Meeks did that. Yeah.
I mean, and from my point of view, this is both with women getting to these powerful positions, Pelosi being an example, Kamala Harris, and often with the Black people that get to these top positions in our government. They basically got there by proving they will do exactly the same as the white men that came before them.
Exactly.
So it doesn't change anything to say, oh, that person's Black. He proved that he would do exactly as the white men that came before him. And that's why he's there. That's how he got there.
It just means that they're incapable of ruling in the same old way. Doesn't mean they're not capable of ruling. They just don't rule in the same old way. If it becomes necessary to put a blackface there, put a blackface there. They can convince masses of people to be anti-Black. They can convince masses of people to be anti-woman. They don't give a damn about that. They'll challenge even the notions that they've created themselves. They prompted among the people themselves. They will go against those notions if it satisfies their interests about women, about Black people. Look at what you have. I mean, the first time in history, you got Leonard Peltier locked up in prison for I don't know how long. And now you got, for the first time in history, an indigenous woman who is over the Interior Department.
Secretary of Interior,
that's what we're looking at. That's the kind of system that we're looking at. That's the problem. Yeah.
So in these last few minutes, I wanted to ask you what the next steps are for your trial, for your charges, and how people can support you in your fight.
Well, I think it's really important for the people to understand that it's all of our fights. And we're saying hands off Uhuru. And by the way, Uhuru in Swahili means freedom. Hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa. And we call on people to go to handsoffuhuru.org. And that's UHURU, handsoffuhuru.org. And you can learn all kinds of things about a movement, how you can participate. The United States government stole 130,000 signatures on petitions that we had on change.org that we were going to take to the United Nations, charging the United States with violation of the United Nations Convention and on genocide. And, help us get those petitions back. Get to handsoffuhuru.org, because we think it's really important, because they attacked us they attacked us because they don't want those petitions. They don't want the United Nations. They don't want scrutiny about peoples around the world. And the United Nations has been their handmaiden. I know that, but it's a political forum that's of some significance, which is one of the reasons. And they would certainly deny Africans in this country access to that if they can. 1952 was the first time that this Wichita genocide was taken before the United Nations by Black people. Paul Robeson was one of them. So that's one thing. Go to handsoffuhuru.org. Sign up to be a part of the emergency response. So when an indictment comes down, we know how to get in touch with you. We want you to be able, wherever you are, to be able to go to a federal building, to do something, to make some kind of protest, that let them know that you know what it is that they're doing and that is bogus. The issue has seldom been that white people and others don't know something is right or wrong. The issue has been that they've been denied leadership to say how to respond to it. So what we're saying is you can respond, and that you can acknowledge that this attack on the Uhuru movement, the African People's Socialist Party, is an attack on you too, because it's an attack on basic democratic rights. This has got nothing to do whether you believe in the same thing I believe in terms of what Africans have to do to be free, what that means, etc. But you believe in democratic rights, free speech, freedom of assembly. These are things that I think we have to protect with all of our energy. And also, I think it's really important for us to move in a way that exposes this, that exposes what the government is doing. Take what we're doing now, share this with as many of your contacts as possible. Let's break out of this encirclement, this silo that they would keep this discussion locked in. Handsoffuhuru.org. And also, we're going to need a minimum of something like $500,000 just in legal fees. We spent $40,000 just trying to replace computers, cell phones, and the doors that they knocked in, the windows that they knocked in already. They would take all the money we got, make us spend it on legal fees so that we can't carry out these programs, build basketball courts for the children in this community, etc. Unite with us, unite with this project for Black people to become self-determining, and do everything you can to make it impossible for them to simply take us off the streets, take these programs off the streets, and maintain African people in a state of being beggars when we have the capacity and the will to be a free people. So handsoffuhuru.org. I would call on you to go there, and you can see. And on I should mention this very quickly on that. I don't know if you're familiar with Ward Churchill.
Yeah.
He is an expert on this question of FBI interference and what have you. So part of what we're doing on Saturday, January 21st at 3 p.m., Hands Off Uhuru, we're having a mass thing. Churchill is going to be one of the presenters. We want to expose everything they've done. This is our weapon. Truth is our weapon. And exposure is our weapon, which is one of the reasons they want to stop us from telling the truth by claiming our truth is something that was invented by Russia as opposed to by our relationship with this country.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me, but also thank you for your ongoing passion and your fight. And I hope you easily beat these charges. But obviously, as you've spent the hour saying, this is much bigger than just what they're trying to do to you. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lee.
Talk to you soon. All right. I hope you enjoyed that. That was powerful. Thank you, Chairman Yeshitela, for speaking so much truth across this hour. It really was brilliant. And folks, I hope you do as he said and go to handsoffuhuru.org. And also, we are completely independently funded. We do not have any corporate backers. This is all kept going by you guys. So please join patreon.com/behindtheheadlines. We're throwing in some new fun perks there, such as a blooper reel from my Most Censored News episodes. By the way, the new episode of Most Censored News is up. It has to do with the new revelations that NATO has said publicly, but people not talked in the not covered in the mainstream media, but said publicly that they're working on mind control, and they view the human brain as the latest battlefield. So yeah, that's my latest episode of Most Censored News. You can watch all of it at youtube.com/behindtheheadlines. This interview, if you want to share this interview, is not just a live stream. It will be at youtube.com/behindtheheadlines for you to share with friends. Also, you can find my interviews with Medea Benjamin from Code Pink, Richard Wolff, The Economist, Chris Hedges, Scott Ritter, Stephen Donziger. So many are there at youtube.com/behindtheheadlines. Margaret Kimberly. I hope you will check all of that out, and I will see you soon. Keep fighting.